Okay. All right. So before we jump into the demo, just wanted to give you a little overview of what Honorlock can do for you. So Honorlock is a remote proctoring service. We are used in conjunction with your Canvas quizzes, as well as your third-party publisher quizzes to proctor your assessments. As far as scheduling goes for proctoring, there is some scheduling that needs to be done on your end. However, no more than you're already accustomed to. So as far as scheduling the exam availability, the number of attempts, the timer, basically anything that has to do with time or exam availability is all still done in Canvas. So when you're creating your quiz, you're designating that availability, that time limit, any accommodations, any time accommodations, that's all still done in Canvas. Honorlock is going to piggyback off of those settings that you set in Canvas. Now, on the student end, there's actually zero scheduling necessary. So we have proctors and support available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So your students are able to test at 6 in the morning, 6 at night, or even midnight if they wish, as long as the exam is currently available to them. So what I have up in front of me here on my screen is a Canvas test instance that we have access to at Honorlock. Yours most likely looks a little bit different than ours. However, the functionality of creating quizzes and enabling Honorlock for those quizzes is pretty much identical. So it's the same across the board. So to get started here, we will access a course in Canvas. And just a heads up before I jump into things here, we'll start the demonstration off with how to use Honorlock for Canvas quizzes. And I'll go over the faculty perspective of enabling Honorlock for the exams. We'll cover the student perspective of taking an exam that's Honorlock enabled. And then lastly, we will go over the results. So how to review your student session recordings. We'll do all of that, and then we'll take a break and we'll go over your questions that pertain to Canvas quizzes in Honorlock. And then we'll have a much shorter demonstration on how to use Honorlock with third-party exam publishers. Companies like Cengage, McGraw-Hill, Pearson, etc. All right, so if you're using Honorlock for the first time, you'll come to your course and you won't see Honorlock. It should be here on your navigation pane on the left-hand side. Mine says Honorlock Prod. However, yours will read as Honorlock. Now, if you don't see it, you'll need to go to Settings. And from Settings to Navigation. And in this navigation section, the top half, these are things that are already enabled for your course. The bottom half are things that are not yet enabled. So you'll see Honorlock down here. If it's not enabled, you can simply drag it and drop it into the top half, or you can click the 3 dots associated with it and click Enable. Once you're done with that, just be sure to save your changes and you'll have access to Honorlock on the left-hand side. So let's go ahead and launch the Honorlock tool. All right. So from here, yours will definitely look different than mine, but you will actually see a list of all of your Canvas quizzes right here. And by default, none of them will be Honorlock enabled. That's up to you. As you can see here, I have a few quizzes that are already enabled. They have results and settings buttons. And then I do have one exam here that has not been enabled yet. So if I go ahead and click Enable, that will take me here to my proctoring settings, where I'm customizing the exam experience, my student guidelines, where I'm defining what my students can or cannot do during their exam, additional instructions for expanding on those guideline toggles, and accommodations. Now, I'll be covering all of these in depth. Just wanted to show you how easy it is to enable Honorlock. So once you have everything set up as you'd like it, you can go ahead and click Save, and your work is done. Your exam is Honorlock enabled. It is all ready and good to go. I'm going to click Cancel. This is not the exam I'll be working with today. I'll be working with this HL midterm exam. If I click settings, it's going to bring me back to that same screen. So at any point, you do have the ability to go to the settings that you originally set and make adjustments as needed. So let's cover these proctoring settings. To start, they each have a brief description below them, but I'll give you some more details on these. Record webcam, if we turn that on, and we can see it's on because we have this little blue check mark. If that is on, it would indicate that students are required to have a working web camera in order to take their exam. That web camera can be built into their laptop. It can be an external camera that's just connected to their computer via a USB cable, for example. Record webcam also enables the recording of audio through the student's microphone that's built into their computer or attached to their computer. Record screen prompts the student to share and record their screen, similar to how I'm sharing and recording my screen in Zoom with you all now. Record screen also enforces that there is a single display or monitor connected to the computer. That is easily achieved on a laptop, but I'm sure you have some students that are testing from home on desktop computers and they have 2 or 3 monitors connected to their computer. If that's the case, they will be prompted to physically disconnect any additional monitors before they can actually start their exam. The reason that we do that is because Honorlock can only record one screen, and we need to ensure there's only one screen, or that potentially leaves students to access resources on a different display. Record web traffic is going to log the student's internet activity during the exam inside the Google Chrome browser. So Google Chrome is the only compatible web browser with Honorlock. While we do support a variety of different devices like Mac computers, Windows 10 computers, even Chromebooks, Google Chrome will need to be installed and used for Honorlock exams. This web traffic, the internet activity, is viewable in the session recordings when you're reviewing your students' results. Next, we're going into what we call the authentication steps. So these are the steps the student goes through before they can start their exam. The first of which is called the student photo. We also like to call this the selfie. This prompts the student to just take a photo of themselves using their web camera. Now, as far as AI goes, and you'll hear me say AI a lot, I am referencing artificial intelligence. As far as AI goes for the student photo step, there is facial recognition. So it is detecting that there is indeed a face viewable by the web camera when that photo is taken. However, there's no additional AI on top of that. The student photo or face is not being matched to a database of faces or information, nor is it being matched to the student ID step, which is the next step. The student ID step prompts the student to show a photo ID, and it does need to be a photo ID. Much like the previous step, it does have facial recognition. It's making sure it can see a face on that ID card. We would recommend it to be a student ID. However, we would also accept any government issued ID, like a passport or a license, for example. Like the previous step, it's not matching the face on the ID to a database, nor is it matching it to any of the steps here in the authentication process. What it is matching is the full name on the ID, and it's matching that to the name of the student in Canvas. So if you have a student that underwent a last name change, maybe they were recently married, anything along those lines, they'll want to get that updated in Canvas and on their ID so they match accordingly. Last of the authentication steps is the room scan. This prompts students to do a 360-degree environment scan of their surroundings, as well as the desk or surface area that they're using to test on before they're able to enter their exam. Now, you'll see me take a room scan when I get to the student perspective here, but a few important things to point out regarding the room scan. One is that the room scan cannot detect any objects. So it cannot see things that potentially shouldn't be in the exam environment. Objects like phones, devices, notes, textbooks, etc. There's actually no artificial intelligence currently built into the room scan. It also cannot detect whether or not the student performed a complete, slow, and sufficient room scan. So it's really up to both the student and the instructor to make sure these room scans are completed in a sufficient manner. For the instructors, I'd recommend providing instructions on what your expectations are, your guidelines for completing these room scans. I even have some clients that let students know that they'll be penalized if they don't provide a full room scan. And then, of course, it is also up to your students to follow those directions and perform complete room scans. All of these three steps, the photo, the ID, and the room scan, are meant to be serving as reference points for yourselves as faculty and admins. You can view any of these options for a student session when you're accessing their session recording. Manual review, that is a different level of service with Honorlock. I won't be covering that today. Next, we have our during exam options, one of which is a basic calculator. The other is a scientific calculator. If either of these is enabled, they'll appear on the top right of the test page throughout the exam. If you're looking to provide your students a more advanced calculator, something like a graphing calculator, for example, you'll want to make sure that you're providing students a link to a website where they can access that kind of calculator. And we'll go over providing those links shortly. Next, we do have the ability to disable copy and paste for your exams. This includes keyboard commands like Command-C on a Mac or Control-C on a Windows device. It also includes right-clicking. So as you can see on my screen, I've highlighted some text and I initiated a two-finger click or a right-click on Mac. And I see this drop-down. As long as disable copy and paste is turned on, we will not have access to this drop-down menu, nor will we be able to copy or paste on any of our test pages. Next, we have disable printing. This blocks the printing of the exam content of the test page. So while students are still able to bring up the print screen dialog box where they set their options for printing, all of the pages will appear completely blank, therefore preventing them from printing to a local printer or saving to a PDF. Next, we have Browser Guard. So Browser Guard is Honorlock's form of a lockdown browser. It's going to limit the browser activity to the exam content and to any whitelisted URLs. My preferred way of saying that is allowed websites. So let me give you an idea of how Browser Guard works. So while Honorlock is a Google Chrome extension, we're not an application installed to the computer itself. Therefore, we do not have any control over the computer or the operating system. Our control is limited to Google Chrome, but there's a few things that we can do. One is we can prevent the creation of new tabs and navigating to websites that are not allowed for the exam. Those tabs will actually be automatically closed by Honorlock if they're not allowed websites. Browser Guard is also going to force the test page to full screen, much like you see my browser window here is in full screen, and it's going to force the test page to the forefront of the display. So while we don't have access and control to the computer itself, students may potentially be able to open applications. We'll use Microsoft Word as an example. So during my exam, I have Browser Guard on. As a student, I am able to open Microsoft Word. However, with Browser Guard on, we're forcing the test page to the forefront of the screen, therefore preventing the student from accessing, viewing, and using Microsoft Word. Often used in conjunction with Browser Guard is whitelist URLs. If we turn that on, we get this configuration box. Just to give you an example of how this works, if I type in youtube.com, I click add site, I'm effectively giving my students access to every single video all across YouTube. Most likely not something you're looking to do. You'll want to make sure that you whitelist the specific URL or website, limiting your students' access to a single resource. In this case, one video. Now, when you're whitelisting URLs here, you're effectively telling Honorlock which websites are allowed. However, you'll also need to provide those links to your students because it's not providing the links through this feature. Those links can be provided either in the Canvas exam instructions or even better, directly in a question stem, allowing students ease of access to things like a periodic table, a third-party calculator, etc. Lastly, we have a simulated, not proctored exam setting here. If this is turned on, these student sessions for this exam will not be recorded, proctored, or flagged. Use case for this is low stakes or no stakes exams, customized practice exams, etc. In the same vein of a simulated exam, if we go to the top right of our page and click Menu, we can go to Add Practice Exam. We click OK, that's automatically going to add a quiz to this Canvas course called Honorlock Practice Exam. This quiz has a few questions on it, has some questions relating to remote proctoring and Honorlock in general. The purpose of the practice exam is to give students an opportunity to familiarize themselves with how Honorlock works. They'll be able to go through all of the authentication steps, all the same steps they would go through for an actual exam. Make sure they're not having any compatibility or technical issues. And that's really going to set them up for success when they need to take an actual high stakes exam. Strongly recommend adding a practice exam to each of your courses. Moving on, we have our student guidelines and additional instruction section. So here, these student guidelines, we have these little nifty toggles, and these are great to serve as reminders, one for your students, but also for yourselves. You know, we're reminding you things that are possible that you could allow or disallow for an exam. So just to give you a brief overview of all of these toggles, and just so you know, these are all off by default. So when you're enabling Honorlock for your first exam, they will all be off. Open Book Allowed would indicate to students that they can access an ebook or a textbook during their exam. Notes Allowed references physical notes and those being allowed during an exam. Scratch paper allowed, that one is fairly self-explanatory. However, you may want to expand on that in the additional instruction section. You could let your students know how many pieces of scratch paper are allowed. You could let them know that they need to show that scratch paper to the camera, front and back, to show that it is blank. Most likely, this is advised to be done during the room scan. Restroom breaks allowed, also self-explanatory, but something you could expand on. If you're choosing to allow breaks, you'll want to let your students know how many breaks they can take, what the duration of those breaks is, etc. Handheld calculator allowed. That references physical calculators. You could let your students know specific models that they could use in the instruction section. Now, if handheld calculator is turned on, this would never indicate that the use of a mobile phone to access a calculator is allowed. Mobile phones are strictly prohibited unless you're explicitly indicating instructions that phones are allowed down here in the additional instruction section. Headphones allowed. That one is self-explanatory, but it does go hand in hand with hats allowed. As I'm sure you're aware, if a student's wearing, say, a beanie or maybe even a hoodie, you know, anything that's going to cover a student's ears, they could technically be covering headphones or earbuds. So that's something to make note of before you enable or disable these settings. Testing in a public area. If we turn that on, we're letting students know they could potentially be taking an exam in a coffee shop, for example, or a public library, anything along those lines. Basically in an area where there's some things going on. There's maybe music in the background, there's people talking, there's people walking behind behind the student as they're taking the exam, things like that. Background noise allowed, if we turn that on, let's say they're not allowed to test in a public area, but background noise is allowed. That would indicate this to the student that they can take an exam with music on in the background. Maybe they're at home and they have a family member in the adjacent room watching television, for example. Now, the additional instructions is a great place to expand on all of these toggles that I just went over. I have a really detailed example. Let me zoom in on my screen a bit here so you can actually see it. So I let the students know it's a closed note exam, and then I proceed to tell them everything that is or isn't allowed, most of which is not allowed. Cell phones, tablets, laptops, smartwatches. I even let them know to show their entire work area during the room scan or they will be penalized. I then go into detail on the ideal testing environment. These are important. Sufficient lighting is really important for the webcam recording. And being sure of the desk or table is clear of all materials, no books, papers, notebooks, calculators, etc. The student guidelines and the additional instruction section, these are all visible to students before they launch proctoring with Honorlock and start taking their exam. Hopefully they read through these before they do start their exam, but our proctors and support team also have access to these at all times. So if they reach out to support, if a student contacts support and they have a question, our support team can reference these guidelines and instructions and assist them accordingly. And our proctors will always do their best to enforce your guidelines. Now, accommodations is something that is not visible to students. Accommodations are only visible to our support and proctoring teams. I have a few examples here. John Doe is allowed to use a second monitor. This is a good one. So I told you about that single display feature. If John Doe is allowed this accommodation, John can reach out to our support team and they can bypass that step for him. Jane Smith is allowed 1 5-minute restroom break. Now, if you're just giving Jane Smith a restroom break, but none of the rest of her classmates, you'll most likely want to include that here as to not alert the class of Jane's accommodation. These accommodations are all related to proctoring and to the authentication steps. So anything that has to do with the availability of the exam, so the start, end date, due date, the number of attempts, the timer for the exam, even time extensions or accommodations of that respect, that's all still controlled in Canvas. And I would advise against including accommodations along those lines here. Exam visibility. This defaults to no, use the dates on the exam to determine student view. I highly recommend leaving this at no. Changing it to yes is always going to show this exam to students, regardless of whether or not the exam is available. And that can be quite confusing. So if you're just enabling your first exam here, you will need to make sure you're saving your changes, or if you're coming back to make changes, you'll want to save those as well. You also have the ability to disable Honorlock for a previously enabled exam. Now, if you're coming here for the first time, you'll most likely need a helping hand, and that's perfectly fine. We have some resources for you here. On the bottom right, this little chat bubble down here, this is going to start a chat with our support team. This need help button is going to do the same thing. It will start a chat. Our support team is available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. For faculty and administrators, our support is available via phone, chat, and email. Still recommend using this chat support for the most immediate of responses. Now, if you're looking to figure some things out on your own, that works as well. If we click our menu button on the top right, we can click on Honorlock Guide. That's going to take us over to our knowledge base, where we have all of our resources, and more specifically to an article on how to use Honorlock with Canvas. This covers everything that I'm going over today and more. And also on our knowledge base, you'll have access to many other articles and how-to videos. How to use Honorlock. We have a short how-to video on that as well. All right. So if you're like me and you spend a whole lot of time on something, you'll want to save your work. And we can do that here. So after setting our proctoring settings, our student guidelines, and additional instructions, we can save all of that for use on future exams. With this exam profiles button, we'll have two options. One, we can create a new profile based on what we have currently on our screen. Two, we can apply an existing profile. Now you may have like a high stakes profile, a low stakes profile, where you have different guidelines, and you can do that here. These profiles are at the user level, so they can be accessed across all of your courses in Canvas. However, they cannot be shared between users, so you'll need to create your own profiles. Now, before we jump over into the student experience, there is one thing I'd like to show you, and that's a change that Honorlock makes to your Canvas quiz. So if I go to my quizzes section and to this midterm exam, I'll click the edit button. So one change you'll notice is in the instructions, you'll see this Honorlock Chrome extension required. This is completely normal. This is just what students are going to see if they don't have the Honorlock extension installed. So we don't want to remove this. Please leave this as is. And then you'll also notice we're in the same place where you're setting your exam availability, your time limit, your number of attempts, and then your due, available from, and until. You'll also notice that this quiz does require an access code. This access code reads as HL no edit followed by a series of characters. We were trying to give everyone a hint with this no edit text, and that's because this access code is required by Honorlock in order to proctor this quiz. So a little background on that. When you enable Honorlock for a Canvas quiz, we automatically assign an access code to that quiz. It is randomized here. They'll all be different for all of your exams. When a student goes to take this quiz, they'll need to launch proctoring with Honorlock, and Honorlock actually automatically inserts this access code. So the student does not need this access code to take their exam. So a few important points here. One is that this access code should never be changed. If you were to change the access code, that would prevent students from taking their Honorlock exam. It should never be removed. If you were to remove the access code, that's also going to allow students to take their exam without Honorlock, no proctoring. Lastly, it's important that this access code never be provided to students. Students do not need this access code. And if they were provided the access code, they could potentially take their exam unproctored. So long story short, leave the access code as is and do not provide it to students. All right, so let's log out of our faculty account and log into our student account here. All right, so from the student perspective, we will also want to access a course. Now for a Canvas exam that has been Honorlock enabled, students can access that from a couple places. One, from the quizzes section. So they can go ahead and just click on that quiz and get started with Honorlock. Or they can go to the Honorlock tool. Now, the first time they try to take an Honorlock exam, they will be prompted that they'll need the Honorlock Chrome extension and they'll need to use Google Chrome for the exam. To get that extension installed, they'll need to agree to our terms of service and our privacy policy and click Get Started. That will take them over to the Chrome Web Store. where all of Chrome's extensions are housed. They can click Add to Chrome, Add Extension, and that's it. Simple as that. When they go back to Canvas now, it'll bypass that screen and they'll have access to a list of their available exams. So immediately, students already have access to our chat support here on the bottom right and up here on the top right. Support for students is limited to chat and email. We do not offer phone support currently for students. So to get started, that student will need to click that launch button associated with the exam. Mine is telling me resume quiz. Let me see here. Okay, that's fine. So your students will obviously see a take the quiz button. I'm seeing resume because I was in there earlier today. But your students will see this screen. So we're brought to our student guidelines. All of those toggles are showing up here with the bullet points, and our additional instructions will show below that. We still have access to chat down here and up here. And as a student, we also have access to a guide. This is going to open a PDF file, and it's covering all of the steps that I'm taking today to get into my exam. Lastly, students also have access to a calculator if it was enabled. That will be on the top right throughout the exam. Now, immediately, we don't have a way to start our exam, and we did that purposely. We'll need to scroll down, hopefully reading the instructions, the guidelines, and at the very bottom of the page, we'll be able to launch proctoring. So let's go ahead and do that. And I am going to organize my windows a little bit here. Your students will not need to do this. And I'm doing this because for the purposes of the demonstration, I like to be able to have both screens up so we can see everything. Okay. What is this? That is another demo screen. Okay. All right. Nice to meet you all. So we're at that first step, authentication step, and that is the student photo. So we'll go ahead and click Take Photo. Next, we're prompted for our ID. So I'll click I have my ID. I'll hold that up. Click Take ID Photo. And there, ID verified successfully. Now we're at the room scan. So I'll click Begin Room Scan. And at this point, I'll see a countdown. It's going to tell me to scan my room 360 degrees, include my work area, make sure to show your desk area and any scratch paper. So I have a laptop, so I'll just unplug my power cord here, pick it up. Now, in a perfect world, I hold it off to the side because we don't need to see me for the scan. We need to see the room. And I would just slowly but surely scan my entire room, making sure that we're seeing all of the walls, making sure there's no one in the room, etc. Now, we'll also want to show our desk or our surface area. Make sure that's clear of any materials. And then when we're done, I'll just click I'm done. And then it asks me, does your room show your environment clearly? I have the opportunity to redo it if I'd like. If I notice that I missed a section of my room, I forgot to show my desk, I do have the ability to redo the room scan. If I am content with it, I can click Yes, Submit. All right, so next we're going to launch the screen recording. We're clicking on this image preview of our screen and clicking Share. And then lastly, we're going to click to begin. All right. So at this point, your students can just proceed with their exam as they would normally. They can answer questions, they can navigate through their exam, etc. Your students will not need to watch themselves in the web camera throughout the whole exam like I'm doing now. By default, this will be maximized here. They won't need to look at themselves. That could be quite anxiety inducing. All right. So from here, I want to talk a little bit about how our proctoring works. I think it's important that you have a good understanding and we can set some expectations here with our proctoring. So our proctoring does start and end with artificial intelligence. We do not have a live proctor watching the entirety of all of your student sessions. So with the artificial intelligence, it's looking for certain things or abnormalities, we would call them, and it's flagging those things. It's looking for things in terms of audio and video. So for audio, just to give you an example, it does try to hone in on keywords. So we're recording the audio, we're generating a transcript based off that audio. And if a student does say a keyword, we would flag that. Just an example would be personal assistance. So if I said, okay, Google, or hey, Alexa, trying to wake up another device to ask it a question, we're flagging that behavior. In terms of video, we are ensuring that there is at least one face in the web camera like there is now, and no more than one face. So if at any point, if I got up and I left the room, I went to the bathroom or the kitchen, or even if I was, looking down at something and my face wasn't completely visible, that is going to flag the session face not visible. That is a big one. Another flag that we deal with is multiple people detected. So the webcam recording is able to detect if there is another face present. So if I have a family member or a friend walk behind me and their face is on the web camera, even for a moment, it's going to flag that as multiple people detected. So these are just some of the examples of our flags. And we have proctors. We have live proctors working around the clock. As these flags come, they're reviewing them. They're looking at every single flag that comes in for student sessions. They're looking into the session, viewing it in the present moment, what's going on, and they're looking at the past 30 to 60 seconds as well to see what was going on. Now, they're on the lookout, obviously, for academic dishonesty. That is the primary goal, is to prevent academic dishonesty. But they're also looking for things that could potentially lead to academic dishonesty. It could be that a student has someone else in the room and they're watching television. That's not allowed. They're trying to do the best to enforce your guidelines and prevent academic dishonesty even before it happens. So they'll use their best judgment. And if they find a case that needs to be intervened on, they will initiate what we call a live pop-in on the student. So much like how a student can start a chat with our support team here on the bottom right of my screen, our proctors can also start chats with students. Basically, it would notify the student that a live proctor was entering their session. The proctor would introduce themselves. Hi, my name is Nick. I'm your Honorlock proctor today. And just as an example here, I noticed you had a third party in the room that could be potentially assisting you with your exam. Could you please ask them to leave and secure your testing environment? So this is just an example. Maybe we got that multiple people detected flag. That was why the proctor looked in on the session. And then they asked the student to have that person leave the room. These are generally how these pop-ins go. They are polite and courteous, our proctors, but they are quick and efficient. The reason for that is because we are not able to stop the exam timer. So the timer, if you have one for your exam, continues to run during that pop-in. So they try to limit those pop-ins to 1 or 2 minutes if possible. So they'll make a request of the student, like asking someone to leave the room, and hopefully the student abides by that request. Once that's done, the student would be able to resume their exam. The proctor would not prevent them from continuing their exam. However, they would flag the session with a violation, a red flag, something to call your attention to it. However, it's still up to you to look into those flags and make your own assessment, your own determination as to what happened. So let's go ahead and look at those flags. I'm going to submit my quiz, and we're going to hop over onto the instructor view again. All right. So we'll go back to that same course and to the Honorlock tool. And this time we're going to go to results. All right, so here we're going to see a list of all of our student sessions, the recorded sessions for each of the exam, for this specific exam, my apologies. You'll see the student's name. You'll see dates and timestamps of when they started and ended their exam, for example. And you'll also see an incident level for that exam. Now you can sort these students by clicking on a column header. You can even search for students. I think I have one under Nicholas. There we go. And you can also filter your sessions by low, medium, or high incident level. So low incident level, these are the ones that you really need to pay least attention to because there were no flags. The AI did not notice anything abnormal. Now, you're obviously more than welcome to review all of your student sessions. We're just trying to save you some time here. Medium incident level sessions, these are the ones where at least one flag occurred. It could be as innocent as a student looking down and writing on scratch paper for an exam where scratch paper was allowed. If they got that face not visible flag, that would show up as a yellow incident level session. Now, a flag does not indicate academic dishonesty. A flag is just a notification. It's really up to you to go into those sessions, look at the flags. You don't need to watch the entire session. You can navigate right to a flag and then, make your own assessment. High incident level sessions, these are the ones you want to pay most attention to because there was a red flag or violation applied by a proctor at Honorlock to the session. These are the sessions we'll be looking at today. So here, this one at the top, this is the one I actually just took. However, I'm not going to be using it for today's demonstration, and I'll tell you why. As you can see here, we just ended the exam. For Honorlock proctored exams, we use a high definition webcam recording and screen recording, and it takes us time to process and upload that video content so it's viewable by yourselves. Now, in general, I'd say your student session should be viewable, should be accessible within the hour of when a student submits it. However, worst case scenario, we'll say it's a very high volume time, maybe it's finals, or maybe your students' exams are very long. If you have 3 to 4 hour long exams, that's a lot of video content to process. Those exams can technically take up to 24 hours before you're able to view those session recordings. So for today, we're actually going to use one of my previous sessions. I think it's back in August. I have a lot of flags on it, and that's why I like to use it. I think it's this one. Let me see. No, let me see here. My apologies. It has to be this one. Okay. Okay. Yes. All right. So we're in our session viewer, and I'm going to give you a little tip here before we even get started with the session. Currently, I'm in Chrome, and most likely you use Chrome as well. As you can see here, I have my zoom level set to 100%. What you'll notice is I can only see a couple of events here on the bottom right, and this details box seems to be cut off a little bit. Now, I do have the ability to scroll up and down in these. However, if you zoom out, say to 80%, that's how I have it set here, you'll see a whole lot more. We're working on improving our session viewer, but in the meantime, this is an appropriate workaround. All right, so for navigating throughout a student session, we have a whole lot of tools for you. We can obviously play and pause the session, and that's going to keep them in sync, the webcam recording and the screen recording. We can jump forward 10 seconds, we can jump back 10 seconds, and we can increase the playback speed or decrease the playback speed. There's also a couple other controls. If we right-click a video and select Show Controls, we can do that on both of the videos. what you'll notice is you can mute a session, which is useful for a demo because I don't want to hear myself talking over myself here. We can also maximize either of the videos. So if you want to get a closer look at something, you have that ability. And lastly, you can scrub through a session. And what I mean by that is this little slider, this little toggle here. You can drag this to navigate to specific points, or you can click anywhere on this line as well. Let me go ahead and pause here. All right, so those are all of the manual controls that you have available to you. However, I would recommend using this events list as much as possible. Just going to be quick and easy for you. So our events list is going to start when proctoring is launched. So that's when a student actually clicks that launch proctoring button. That is not technically the start of the exam. Something that I think I failed to mention when I was going through those student steps is that if you set a timer for your exam in Canvas, that timer does not begin until the student is viewing question 1. So you don't need to worry about that timer, about these authentication steps eating into the timer. Things like the room scan, etc. So we can see these authentication steps. We have our profile picture, our ID picture, our room scan. We can click on the event and it's actually going to bring us to that step. We can do that with the room scan as well. We can watch that little 20-second clip of the room scan. And then when you see webcam video, screen capture video, that should pretty much line up with question 1. That is the start of the exam. So for question 1, I have a green success indicator. I answered the question, there was no flags, no abnormalities. Question 2, you can see I have 7 indicators. If there's an arrow attached to an event, that indicates it can be clicked and expanded. So I have a whole lot going on here. First of which is speech detected personal assistant. We also have a view transcript button. If I click that, it's going to take me to that particular point of the exam. You can actually see I'm not even in front of my computer here. I'm in the next room and I'm saying, okay, Google, hey, Alexa, trying to wake up that device. And in conjunction with these speech detected personal assistant flags, we have face not clearly visible because I'm clearly not in front of the webcam. Now, these are all things that would result in a live pop-in from one of our proctors at Honorlock. Moving down, we have some less severe flags. We have right-click detected, copy detected. Just to give you a better idea, we're still blocking that action. We're blocking the right-click, we're blocking the copy, but we're going to let the student know we're doing so, and we're going to let you know as well. Last flag I have here is test window lost focus. So test window lost focus is a great flag, but you may have some false positives with it. So with test window lost focus, it's going to generate this flag if at any point the test page was not the primary focus in the forefront of your student's screen. Now, I'm sure you're aware that, there are pop-ups in Canvas. As you can see on the screen now, this is a false positive for a test window lost focus flag. Students might have a low battery warning that pops up on their screen. That would also be a false positive. So it is very sensitive, but we want you to be aware if at any point that test window is covered by anything. So if a student tries to open another application, you're going to get that test window lost focus flag, even if it's just for a brief second that they open that application and then the test window came back to the forefront. Lastly, we'll see when the student submitted the exam. Now on the bottom left here, we have access to our transcript. If we click the question tab, that's simply going to show us what the current question is that the student's on at that particular point of the exam. And then the details tab, that's going to show you your student guidelines you set and your additional instructions just to be used as a reference point. If we close this, last thing I want to show you is our summary report. So this summary report is available immediately after an exam's due date, not before. It's going to give you a high-level overview of how many how many flags were applied, how many students didn't have any issues. And then it's going to break down those student sessions and show you what exactly happened in terms of flags. This report can be exported to a PDF file. All right, so that concludes my demonstration for using Canvas with Honorlock. Happy to take some time now to go over any questions that you all have, and then we can proceed into a little demonstration of using Honorlock with third party. All right, so I'm just going to start off with the questions that we have in the Q&A section, and then I'll check our chat pane. So Jerry Pedraza asked, you mentioned proctoring, so is there a live person monitoring the student? I believe I covered this, Jerry, but we do not have a proctor watching the entirety of every single student's exams. It starts with artificial intelligence and may lead to intervention by one of our proctors. Jerry also asked, so how does it work if you allow a second monitor for someone, but you are recording the monitor? So the way it works, Jerry, is if you allow a student to have a second monitor, but we're recording the monitor, we're only recording one of those monitors. That's why it's really an accommodation. So if you're allowing a student to have two monitors, they could potentially do whatever they want on that second monitor that's not being recorded. And that's why we enforce a single display when we are screen recording normally. And Jerry asked, profiles, are these saved between courses? Jerry, yes, you can use the profiles across all of your courses, but they're at the user level. You cannot share them between users. What is the maximum time a test can be proctored? Jerry, that is a good question. I've never been asked that before, but I will make an assumption now and I will follow up with a more concrete answer. And Jerry, the answer, what I believe the answer to be is that there is no limit. If there is any limit, that would be set in Canvas and set by you. As far as Honorlock goes, we're working around the clock. We have proctors at around 24 hours a day. So no issue there. All right, Mansoor's question is, what if the students write down their answers on paper and then upload a copy of their exam, which means their faces will not be showing most of the time? Will that be flagged as a high or medium incident? Okay, this is a little bit of a loaded question, Mansoor, so I'm gonna actually show you some things in Honorlock as well while I'm answering it. So just to start, if your students do need to upload files, Browser Guard will need to be off. Browser Guard is going to prevent a student from accessing files on their computer. So that needs to be off. And then for the students, and the next part of your question, if they're looking down and working on their paper, and that's allowed for the exam, our AI is going to generate some false positive flags of face not visible. However, if you're noting that scratch paper is allowed in the guidelines here, if you're noting that students need to be working on paper, our proctors are aware of that. They can review your guidelines. They're not going to intervene on a student because they're working on scratch paper when scratch paper is allowed. Those flags that I was talking about previously, generally that would be face not visible. That's a medium flag because it does not necessarily indicate academic dishonesty. It's dependent on the guidelines of your exam. Now, does anyone that I answered a question for have any follow-up questions that they'd like to talk about? I'm happy to unmute someone if they'd like to chat. Perfect, Mansoor. Let me go ahead and unmute you here. Okay, you may still need to unmute yourself, but you should be able to do so.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, thank you very much
You're
for
welcome.
letting me ask a follow-up question. For the screen guard or the browser guard,
Mm-hmm.
does that mean that the students will be able to browse other content if I remove it?
Right. Yeah. So that is in Mansoor, the remote proctoring world, as far as mathematics exams, it's difficult. Um, I think that the technology is, while we're getting there, not entirely there. So paper-based exams, while remotely proctored, you will need to make some adjustments to your exam. If they need to upload files, for example, that is going to reduce the integrity of your exam. They could technically access anything on their computer. However, remember that we are recording their screen. So as long as they're aware that their screen is being recorded, it's my hope that they would not try to cheat on their exam. They know they're being recorded.
Right, right. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. And then Ben has a question. When you whitelist an entire site, does it also whitelist all possible paths from that site? So Ben, that's a good question. So youtube.com is going to whitelist anything on youtube.com and anything after it, no matter what. Now, I would believe that to whitelist a specific domain, let's say you have, like I'm on honorlock.instructure.com. Whitelisting this is going to give students access to honorlock.instructure.com. It's not going to give them access to other Instructure websites. Does that answer your question, Ben? Perfect. Okay, and I think we have one more question before we move on to third party. That is from Myra. Myra asked, I didn't understand the statement of create your own profile, user-specific exam profiles. Sure, I'm happy to clarify, Myra. So all of the settings, Myra, that you see on my screen now, the proctoring settings, the student guidelines, and the additional instructions, you have the ability to save these settings to a profile. If you click exam profiles here on the top right, you can type in the name. We'll say low stakes profile. And you can create that profile. That's going to create a profile based on everything you have on the screen. And then you can apply that profile later to other exams. Really just making things easier for you when you need to, you know, the settings that you like to have set for your exam. You know the guidelines that you like to provide for your students. So you have the ability to reuse them for multiple exams. We'll save you a lot of time, Myra. Kevin is asking, what if the faculty whitelist the library website and from the library students need to access Elsevier or other journals? So I'm not really familiar with your URL structure, Kevin. That might be something that we need to chat about. But basically, any website a student needs to access needs to be whitelisted. So we'll say, and I'm just using dummy websites here, Kevin. We'll say tamulibrary.com is the one that you're whitelisting to give them access to the library website. Later on, they need to go to Elsevier. Then you will also need to whitelist Elsevier so they can access that later. Does that answer your question there, Kevin? All right, and do we have people in here that would be interested in seeing how Honorlock works with third-party exams? Oh, I didn't see the Q&A here. I was looking at the chat pane for a moment. My apologies. Okay, got it. Perfect, Kevin. Thank you. All right, so let's take a moment just to look at third-party exams. So third-party exams are any exam that is not an actual Canvas quiz. It's provided by a third-party publisher. Now that publisher might be accessed on like an external website. Like I have my Pearson MyLab Math accessible here. Or it may also be accessible by yourself and students directly within Canvas. We call that a deep integration. We support the use of either the deep integration right in Canvas or an external website. So when you need to give a third-party exam that is not a Canvas quiz, you'll go to your Honorlock tool, you'll go to menu, and register third-party exam. Now, everything from the proctoring settings and below, these are things that we already covered that you're familiar with. Everything above proctoring settings, this is brand new to you. So for a third-party exam, and my example is one that is external. So it's actually on Pearson's website, not integrated into Canvas, but either work. So I have this Honorlock exam here. Well, this is the course, but let me navigate to my exam. Okay, so I have this Honorlock test 2020. And as a student, I'm logged in as a student currently. If I try to access it, I'm prompted for a password. So I've created this test in my lab and I've password protected it. Password protecting your third-party publisher exams is a requirement if you want them to be proctored by Honorlock. So that's the first step. It's to set up your third-party exam, set up the availability, password protect it. Once that's done, you'll go to Honorlock. You'll come to register a third-party exam, which is found in the menu here. You'll name your exam. You'll give it an exam start and an exam end time. Now, the reason that we're providing this availability here is because the exam's not actually, the availability of the exam isn't controlled by Canvas. It's actually controlled by the third-party publisher. So this exam start and exam end is going to indicate when a student can click that launch proctoring button. That's the only thing it controls. All of the other availability settings, the timer, the start end, the due date, that's all still set inside your third-party publisher website. You'll also want to indicate an exam platform. So I have MyLab Math here. That's just used as an indicator for students so they're aware of where they're actually taking their exam and which platform. And then lastly, a password. So for third-party exams, when you create them, you're password protecting them. So we'll say that you created your third-party exam and it has the password of Honorlock123. When you come to register your third-party exam in Honorlock, you'll want that password to be identical to match. The reason for that is that Honorlock needs to insert this password for the student to get them into their Honorlock proctored exam. So let's go ahead and let's save this. I'm going to turn off a couple of the authentication steps just to save us time. And let's create our exam here. All right, so you can see I just created this Pearson Quiz 3. It does have this third-party indicator. Now, let's hop out of our faculty account and log in as a student. So for third-party exams as a student, they will need to access them from the Honorlock tool. They will not find them in quizzes. And then from the Honorlock tool, they can click that launch button. And as you can see, we already have a difference here. We've pinned this tab, the Honorlock tab, to the top left. Our guide is available here. Our calculator and our live chat are available here. And we can launch proctoring. So I turned off the authentication steps like the photo, the ID, the room scan, just so we could get through the authentication process a little quicker here. So we've skipped all of those steps. And after a student does all of those steps, they will view this in the webcam window. This is the last step before a student can get into their exam. So we do have some basic instructions here for the student. Navigate to your exam provider, Pearson, for example. Navigate to the specific exam. And when you are prompted to enter a password, click on the insert password button on the Honorlock webcam window, which is right here. If you need assistance, you can click here. If you can't find your webcam window, you can also click here. So at this point, the student, you could provide them instructions here, like I have a link, which is unfortunately broken, but you could definitely provide your instructions to your student that, hey, you need to navigate to Pearson, you'll need to open this test, etc. So I'll need to go to my test, click on it. When I'm prompted for that password, I'll go to my webcam window and click insert password. Back to my third party, if I click submit, I can get into my exam. So yeah, students would go about taking the exam just as they normally would in their third-party provider. And whenever they're ready, they would obviously want to submit their exam on the third-party provider first. And then once that's done, they can exit out of Honorlock. And that will close that webcam window. Let me just get back into Canvas and then we'll go over any questions that you might have. Okay. Any questions for third-party exams? All right. Well, I really appreciate all your time today. I'll be sure to share the link to the recording for today's training to my key contacts at Texas A&M, and they can pass it along to you all. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I hope you have a great evening.